Welcome back. Following this weekend's dramatic events in Russia, President Biden was asked yesterday if the attempted revolt makes Russian President Vladimir Putin weaker. Here's what the American president said.
By what happened in Russia?
To what extent has Vladimir Putin been weakened by recent events? It's hard to tell, but he's clearly losing the war in Iraq. He's losing the war at home. And he has become a bit of a pariah around the world. It's not just NATO. It's not just the European Union. It's Japan. It's 40 nations.
The president standing on the South Lawn next to Marine One, he said Iraq. He meant, of course, that Putin was struggling with the war in Ukraine. Joining us now to talk about it, Senior Coalitions Advisor for Concerned Veterans for America, retired Master Sergeant Jason Beardsley. He is a decorated combat veteran and intelligence officer. Sir, thank you for being here and, as always, for your service. Let's start with your assessment of what we saw over the weekend in Russia. Of course, this Wagner group, this mercenary force led by Yevgeny Prigozhin, marches to within a couple hundred miles of Moscow. There's been some reporting that he had perhaps some backing from some Russian generals, or at least they were aware of it. Right. But eventually he turned around and now apparently lives in exile in Belarus. So give us your sense as to what this means for the Russian military.
Well, first and foremost, I think the context is really important. What you did see was a 24-hour or less kind of mutiny. No real bloodshed to speak of, although there might have been some. But the real end game, where we're standing today, Prigozhin and his Wagner group are in exile, so to speak, in Belarus. So they're repositioned. You take a force that was looking to be withdrawn from the front lines earlier, has taken a lot of the casualties, and now you position them in Minsk. They have striking capacity, tactical strike capacity into Kyiv or locations that could hurt the supply chains from the United States coming in on the land bridges in Poland and other countries. So we're not quite sure what exactly happened, but I would suggest there was a little bit of intrigue and subterfuge. Both Prigozhin and Vladimir Putin come from St. Petersburg. They've been very much tied to the hip, if you will. And so I think we have some time to really understand what the fallout is.
We had Secretary of State Anthony Blinken on Morning Joe yesterday, and he was candid about how the U.S. is still very much assessing what went on there yesterday. There's a lot that we don't know just yet. This comes, of course, amid the backdrop of the Ukraine counteroffensive, and we should stress it's only been a few weeks. They had said all along that they thought it would be slow going, slower than their counteroffensive last summer. But officials that I talked to say it's been really slow, a matter of moving a few feet or yards at a time. What's the latest you've heard? And if it does continue to struggle, what does that mean for the war at large?
Yeah, it is a brutal fight. We're now talking about a very difficult space that the Russians are dug in. They are able to defend with their armor and their artillery, but it really positions the Ukrainians as having to fight through some of the toughest terrain. And we've seen a lot of the minefields, the armor, dragon's teeth that are barriers for the tanks to move in. It's been very difficult. So the longer that drags on, the more the humanitarian crisis ratchets up. This is why it's so important for folks that really care about this. Both the diplomats and the military ought to be looking for off-ramps. How do we encourage the settlement, a negotiated ceasefire of some sort? And I think for that reason, we have to look to other state actors, including President Xi Jinping.
Yeah, that's where I wanted to go with you now is this. Well, first of all, no one wants to risk escalation. I've got some new reporting out today about how when this mutiny was going on, the White House was very quick to call the Kremlin and say, there's some secure channels that still exist. Say, hey, we got nothing to do with it. This is an internal matter. We're not pushing this. But China has always loomed large in this conflict. They've been supportive of Russia's efforts for the most part. They're not giving them lethal aid, but they certainly haven't, turned their back on Moscow either. What role do you think Beijing could play to broker a deal, and when might they do it?
Yeah, excellent question. I mean, it's a balancing act for China, and I think the visit with Secretary of State Blinken was somewhat productive in that China reiterates, as you said, they're not all in backing Russia, but they are, they're a strategic partner of Russia. Their imports have exceeded, last year's. They're up $80 billion oil and gas. So it's very important. Stability in Russia is important for China, and China has emphasized the right of nations to have that sovereignty, and they're wary of any sort of internal strife that might be caused because they're looking at Taiwan across the straits. So they need to work towards that settlement. But we got indications over the weekend and over the last 2 weeks that the Chinese are really going to be part of this negotiated settlement when it comes down. When that happens, I think that's open to debate. Anybody seeing around the corner at this point is just guessing. But I think the longer this war drags out, the more important it is that partners like China seek that stability. And again, it's about de-escalating the humanitarian crisis.
Yeah, the Secretary of State suggested yesterday that he too believed China could play a role, but suggested it wasn't quite time yet. He didn't think Beijing was serious on the effort, at least at this moment. We shall see. Retired Master Sergeant Jason Beardsley, thank you as always for being here. We really appreciate it.